So, benvenuti, titubanti testi 9, binomio di lettura. Today we are going to discuss around Apollonius Rodius, a famous monologue by Medea, of course. And the two discussants are habitué of Titubanti Testi, Alessandro Giardini from Scuola Normale di Pisa, who proposed the text, and my old friend and colleague Christiane Reitz, University of Rostock and Berlin. So you know the rules, there are no presentations. I'm very happy to have you both here, and I now invite Christiane to present her own, well, actually I do have to share the screen with the presentation.
Yeah, you can leave it for now. It's I'll tell you when to.
Ah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Let's keep that a surprise. and okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much. I'm very grateful, dear Marco, for the invitation, and to Alessandro for the choice of the text. And for 30 years now, I've only engaged with Apollonius in the more or less in the sidelines of my work on ancient epic. I'm have been glad to return to him now in some more detail. In these last 30 years, all the trends and new methods of literary and cultural studies have been applied to this work, from psychoanalytic interpretation to gender studies, and we'll see what we can take from it today. I, as an old-fashioned structuralist, and Alessandro as a young researcher. The passage he has chosen is one of 3 monologues assigned to Medea in the 3rd book of the Argonautica, which show her in a decision-making situation, torn between falling in love with a stranger, Jason, and doubting whether she can and should help him in his endeavor to complete Aeetes' tasks and bring home the golden fleece. The emergence of this love is, you will remember, made obvious by the scene in which Eros shoots an arrow at Medea at his mother's request. Jason is the protege of Athena and Hera. The goddesses had obtained this intervention by Eros in a request to Aphrodite. Probably the cutest scene in all the ancient epic poetry known to me. The 3 monologues have been studied so often in such detail because scholars see them as the missing link between European tragedy, Phaedra in particular is considered here, and the later epic heroines who are shown in exceptional psychological situations, especially Dido in the Aeneid. And of course, the Medea in Valerius Flaccus, who, albeit, is a different character. Valerius's Medea is also used in order to find traces of Ovid's lost Medea tragedy, eventually via the Medea figure in Book 7 of the Metamorphoses. Such studies do not necessarily focus on the text of Apollonius. A more promising approach is to gain clues from the female characters in the Odyssey with regard to Apollonius's intention to design his personnel traditionally or innovatively, his personnel, sorry. He draws on Penelope in the 19th book of the Odyssey in particular to find a model for the hesitating young lover in the Argonautica, especially in contrast to the Helen figure in the Iliad, but also on Nausicaa, especially her dream and her concern about gossip in Odyssey 6. So now, Marco would be for the first slide, please. Disappeared. So I cannot see it, unfortunately. Okay, that's it. Let's take a closer look at the text. So first, the structure. I've taken that from the old commentary by Gillies. You can see on the slide that the interpreters understandably focus on the progress of the plot. So next slide, please. No, over next, then. No, sorry, go back to the beginning. That's all wrong. Yeah, that's it. This one is fine, and then that one. Yeah, okay. Jason is unable to achieve his goal without Medea's help. So how will this goal be achieved? Decision and indecision, and that means the vacillation between alternatives, also seems to be reflected in the texture. Enjambments, assume d'état, and short sentences characterize Medea's speech, according to Hunter and others. Hunter also emphasizes the sudden leaps of thought. Here, so Hunter, we are made to understand that the speech is not really about a rational strategy of action. Within the context of Medea's 3 longer speeches, Fusillo highlights the similarities, abrupt interruptions and wavering between the subjects of speech in the first monologue, as well as self-contradictions, which run counter to Aristotelian notions of character formation. In the second monologue, initially still mental wavering, then a hiding of the decision already made behind an excuse alibi, whereby, I quote, the pragmatic aspects are pushed into the background. In the third monologue, It Est Ours, he emphasizes the complex structure and elaborates on the, I quote, counterbalance of repressed forces. The speaker's hidden desire, hidden from her and therefore from us, is emphasized again. Fusillo describes the nocturnal episode as characterized by a total absence of pragmatic finality. His observations on the epic economy of time, this is my term, not his, are also important. He states that the monologues serve to extend the narrative time, comparable to the narrative practice in novels. In the monologues, the narrator identifies with the character and does not visibly intervene. The depiction of emotion is thus achieved through the reader's identification with the character. He calls that écriture féminine, characterized by passionality and irrationality. By the way, a very pragmatic structure of the sequence of scenes can be found in Natzel 1992, a book that has unfortunately been somewhat forgotten, but to which I will come back in a few moments. So next slide, please. Let's take a look ahead beyond our passage at the progress of the plot. Medea takes the box with the poison from the cupboard. The narrator, who is present here again, attributes the fact that she does not open the box after untying it to the influence of Hera. The crucial doubt, voulas do Jatzosken, which only apparently characterizes her previous actions, is negated in this final sentence at the end of the whole nocturnal episode. What happens next is determined by others. Heres initiesi metatropos. Hera's intervention is usually dismissed by the interpreters as a mere convention, for evidence also in Natzel in one of her long footnotes. Nesselrath discusses this scene in his 2019 article on what he calls almost episodes, precisely because it differs visibly from the comparable Homeric almost episodes, which were similarly described by him in an earlier essay, Die Beinahe Episoden, and by de Jong, who calls them if not episodes. In particular, because our episode dispenses with a formulaic introduction and because the intervening goddess is mentioned so late. Now you could say what's the point? One could also follow an allegorical interpretation, as the Platonic Homeric allegory has done and continues to do so to this day. The divine influence, similar to Athena in this first book of the Iliad, in relation to Pandarus, for example, is to be interpreted as the inner decision of the acting person. Natzl formulates that Apollonius ironizes the Homeric motivational psychology. However, it can also be argued that Apollonius is counting on the educated reader who follows with interest how the narrative voice frees itself from the dilemma it has itself created, so to speak. Instead of following the course of the myth logically and telling it in a straightforward manner, multiple alternatives are presented, and not only through the character's actions, and by no means only to draw attention to the narrative time and the passing of time, but also, so in my opinion, to focus on the epic nature of the epic narrative. Especially if we consider the recognizable and, we must assume, the numerous dramatic and lyrical traditions that are now no longer recognizable to us, we should draw attention to the very genre. On the next slide, please. I cannot go into the lyric now, but I have noticed in a somewhat closer examination of the vocabulary that rare and conspicuous words that Apollonius puts into Medea's mouth are first attested in Bacchylides and Theognis, like Margosune and Polyklautos and Doiatzo. The intransitive use of phlegou, as in Iliad 18, to which the scholiast compares Pindar's Olympics 1:1. An important point concerns the emotional values. Words of salvation and ruin, of honor, shame, reproach, rebuke, especially in the mouth of the Colchian woman, occur in wide variation. And the speech by the Colchians is imagined by Medea, discours rapporté, or as Natzl puts it, the motive of imagined reproach as a sign of shame, eidos. If we look at the use of these terms in Homer, we see that many of them are used in parallel situations, and not only in the scenes with female speakers that the commentators assume to be parallels, as mentioned above, with Nausicaa, but also, who also anticipates the slander, and also with Penelope, but in the Iliad too. When I looked through these passages, I noticed that in some places there was a textual or comprehension problem. Next slide, please. I then consulted the Homeric scholia, and I believe that a tendency can be shown. From the terms in question, which you see on the slide, amechania and epilixo, and so on, I have chosen the following as examples for philological discussion for a variety of reasons. First, amechania. Much has been said about this. It might be of interest here that the very sparse Odyssey scholia seek to give a reason for the respective occurrence of the word in the Odyssey in two places. Lophao. The T scholion on Iliad 21:292 emphasizes that for the meaning, the word kopazai is to be compared, which is used for draft animals. Here, in the Iliad, on the other hand, we are talking about the river god, whom Achilles challenged. Apollonius uses the word in a figurative sense, thus even more conspicuously than the Iliad poet. Epilixo. This is how the beggar Iris described the disguised Odysseus in Odyssey 18:11. It describes to him the reaction of the crowd to his appearance, an evil twinkling. The scholiast instructs us on this Homeric hapax with many etymologies and parallels. Kertomie, the scholion I mentioned on the slide, where Aeneas replies to Achilles' previous slander. There, the talk is about noble or not so noble or nobler descent. Anye, the scholion to Odyssey 20:52, emphasizes that the term means staying fully awake, something indeed like keeping watch, like phylasso. And now, Fteisto, the scholion to Iliad 8:4-9, and if you can please put the next slide on. This commentary concerns the influence of the gods in battle. Hera admonishes Athena, in the spirit of Zeus, not to interfere in the decisive battle. The scholiast takes the opportunity to defend Homer against accusations that he is violating the dignity of the gods with such actions, and writes, and I quote the translation by Nunlist, whenever he, Homer, considers the dignity of the gods, then he says that they are not moved by mortals in the way we would not be by ants. However, when he thinks of his poetry, he follows the mythological tradition and dramatizes his subject matter, presenting gods fighting in alliance with man and among themselves. Nunlist explains, I quote, "This is an obvious attempt to defend Homer against the many complaints about the immorality or lack of dignity of his gods. The critic argues that the divine participation actually makes the poem better, and perhaps also more respectable. Divine interest, whether as active participants or as watching audience, increases the importance of the scene." This is particularly significant with regard to the outcome of the scene, in which, as we have seen, only Hera's intervention prevents the suicide. At the beginning of the speech, Medea had announced Jason's doom as the first alternative, using a term that is put into the mouth of a deity in the Iliad with the same meaning, and which has given Homeric philology cause to reflect on the influence of gods on human destiny in general. This seems to me to be an aspect worth considering, even if it is perhaps not the most important one, for the interpretation of the monologue as an epic experiment. Another point is the following. In the possible, but as we have seen, not final decision-making process, the present situation is, as Fusilo rightly says, translated into action throughout the night. The future course of action is determined not only by the mythical convention, but also by the means used at the beginning of the action concerning Medea, her mechanai. What can the speaker add to this? On the one hand, we gain an insight into her emotional state, but we also get an insight into the narrative bag of tricks. And now the next slide, please. Flashbacks. Playing through alternative courses of action in the past and in the future. Predictions of the consequences. The intervention of supernatural powers. The speaker first formulates an unfulfillable wish in relation to the past. That means also a kind of almost episode, which shows how the plot could have unfolded differently. That's in 73-6. And she then formulates in the optative what the possibilities for the future look like. Either help for Jason and then suicide, with the consequence of slender even after her death, or immediate suicide without making a decision. Both the acting out of the unreal hypothesis and the prognosis, which even offers imagined speech within the speech, as we have seen, are actually the narrator's devices. But here, they are left to the protagonist. The way in which the narrator describes Medea's emotions between the different parts of the scene is impressive, right up to the famous simile of the sunbeam, which illustrates the doubts in Medea's heart with its reflections on the surface of the water. However, it is now the case that the speaker herself not only expresses the value conflicts, as just mentioned, but also her current emotions at the moment of speaking. The speaker also knows, like a narrator, about the influence of supernatural powers on the progress of the plot. Theostis, she says, and Irenaeus, and in a way also Artemis she mentions. And is it not the case that the last three words of the monologue literally nudge us towards the fact that we are taking part in an experiment in storytelling? And I think there's one more slide, Marco. Oh, these are the emotions. Sorry to have skipped this. And yeah. And what I now wanted to notice, to make you notice, is uk onomasta telesai. What is established as an alternative for the future at the end of the monologue is basically unspeakable and will not happen. After all, Medea had probably expressed the idea of suicide a few moments earlier, tetnaien, both in tragic format, hanging is a tragic method of suicide, and by poison. And it also seems important to me that the situation at night, aute in nupti, is very distinctly different from that during the day, eo in 820. Hunter and others rightly pointed to the Homeric nocturnal scenes, like Agamemnon and Odysseus, in which the heroes are driven by their worries. But the conscious anticipation of the morning, which is already apparent beforehand when Medea, while speaking, realizes the joys of life that threaten to elude her, is something special and original indeed. I would therefore like to suggest that the poet here once again places the protagonist in the role of the narrator, who knows more than the acting characters. She has it in her hands, by means of her decision, to use the conventional night scene productively and to transcend the epic models. So, thank you. This is the bibliography if you're interested, and I found a very old Friends translation on my shelves.
Yeah, Christiane, thank you so much for this. I think this was very inspiring. And now I give the word to Alessandro, who proposed the text. So we are very curious also to listen if you want to share with us why does this fit within your own research? What is the urge to present this particular text?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, Professor Reitz, for this beautiful lecture. It never occurred to me to attend a lecture on this text, so I'm very happy that this was the occasion. And thank you, Professor Formisano, Marco, for this invitation. I have a PowerPoint, if I may share it.
Of course you can.
So. suppose. You can see my screen now.
Yes.
And now it's going to the presentation.
Yeah.
So, perfect. So, let's start quite surprisingly with Seneca. There is a moment in his Medea in which tragedy turns into a sort of handbook of literature. The main character has just had the intuition that will change her life and the story of Greek drama, probably. She has to kill her children, and she will do it. In this very moment, she exclaims, Medea nunc sum. Now I am Medea. And this meta-literary pan may seem quite straightforward to us, but it actually teaches us a lecture on poetics. In literature, Medea's character is the archetype of the infanticide. The ancients were already persuaded of this, at least since Euripides, and from this perspective, Seneca's line has a kind of Nietzschean allure in it. We may say it is only when Medea has planned to kill her children that she becomes what she is. So, what should we do with Apollonius's Medea? What about this childless Medea, this young Medea of the Euripidean prequel? This fracture in Medea's literary biography troubled critics, at least since Sainte-Beuve in the 19th century. And still in the 70s, scholars had to fight against old-fashioned colleagues who believed that the Medea in love of Book 3 of the Argonautica was incompatible with the anger-prone, quasi-hysteric refugee of Book 4 and of the Euripidean play. Of course, Apollonius's literary genius is revealed right by the unmedianess of his Medea. She is not Euripides' character, but she is also perfectly consistent with the aged version of herself as portrayed in the Athenian play. So yes, but from a doctus poeta like Apollonius, we would expect perhaps something different, a kind of play with our expectations as readers of Greek literature, some hints to Medea's fate on the Athenian stage, some word or some literary tournure pointing to the future of this character, some Medea nunc sum in the background, we may say. And apparently, nothing of this sort can be explicitly found in Apollonius. No allusion, no intertext, no skillful bridging to Euripides via arte allusiva, subtle apax legomena, learned glossae. Of all models, that of Euripides, which also encloses the most radical core of this mythical character, is somewhat obliterated in the Argonautica. My feeling is that the answer to this kind of riddle is to be found in this text, in this largely known and important text, Medea's monologue, the third one. Here in this speech, which is apparently all about love and teenage feelings, we can see how Apollonius handled the unescapable mother theme, even in this childless era of Medea's life. And how could Apollonius do it? Of course, through the peculiar use of some words, but not in the way perhaps we are used to from modern studies of allusivity. And my reading of this text will try to justify the impression that Apollonius has not completely erased the maternity theme from Medea's character. In this monologue, dealing with love and distress, in fact, she is already speaking like several mothers have done in Greek literature before her. And not any kind of mothers, but grieving mothers, mothers who have lost their child, just as Medea will. So let's start with the fact that in Book 3, we are in the most Euripidean of all possible contexts on a narratological perspective. We have monologues. So this may be the most apparent relic of the Euripidean model in the Argonautica. In Euripides, as well as in Apollonius, Medea expresses herself in monologues, which is a painstaking testimony of her lucidity and at the same time almost solipsistic loneliness. In both works, The unfolding stages of Medea's emotion are punctuated by monologues, working as running commentaries on Medea's emotional activity. And in Apollonius, each of these monologues follows a consistent structure, which is somewhat inherited by Euripides. In fact, in antiquity, Medea's last monologue in Euripides was a model for a kind of disrupted deliberative speech where reason is ultimately defeated by passion. This is how philosophers like Chrysippus used to read this text. And this pendulum between deliberation and irrationality is also to be seen in all of Medea's speeches in Apollonius. So, first, a kind of fact-checking, often announced by an exclamation, Deile ego, or something similar, wretched me. Here Medea describes her factual and emotional state in painful yet dispassionate terms. Second, irrational desire pops up. Her hidden love desire for Jason creeping into her mind in disguised forms, such as a wish for the mysterious stranger to depart, or for him to be safe, or both. And then resolution. I will do so and so. Medea shares with us her will and her plans in close details. Now, monologue 1 and 2 follows this path easily. Here you can see the pattern in the second monologue as well, but monologue 3 does not. It seems that in this very appalling moment for Medea, she is stuck and cannot make up her mind for a resolution. We have fact-checking, then wish, then resolution, but after expressing her apparently choice of action, she comes back suddenly to point number 1 as announced by a new exclamation, and from now on, she will never manage to get out of the loop, fact-checking and wish. Her ultimate resolution will come unannounced. She will try to take her own life, but Hera will stop her, as Professor Reitz underlined. What's the pattern here? For all the other monologues of Medea, we are fully down in a Phaedra situation, the Euripidean love heroine par excellence, night pondering, monologue speaking, always opinion changing character, but in a conscious and rational fashion. But in the last of Medea's monologues, the Phaedra model is heavily contaminated with the Medea one. Medea cannot resolve herself for saving Jason like the Euripidean Medea's wings between killing her children or not. But this is still a vague resemblance, just a shadow of Euripides with no imports on the content of Medea's dilemma. And to better explore this speech, I propose to take another route, a more tortuous one perhaps, which will lead us back to Apollonius with new awareness. Let's talk allusivity then. Scholars are right to point out that the very beginning of this monologue by Medea rewards Odysseus' shipwreck monologue in Odyssey 5. In fact, this is the very first monologue as such in the Odyssey, which is Argonautica's most illustrious model and predecessor. The Deile ego at the beginning of Medea's speech clearly echoes Odysseus' O moi ego deilos, and this is only natural. Odysseus is trapped in a sea storm, just as Medea is in the middle of an emotional tornado, as the simile of a heart race with a sun being mirrored on a whirlpool clearly suggests. So this is the simile that Professor Reitz also quoted. What scholars perhaps sometimes miss to highlight is that, in fact, in Odyssey 5, Odysseus, just like Medea, talks in 3 cadenzas, in 3 times, 3 monologues during the storm, like Medea's 3 speeches during the storm that tosses her mind in Book 3. And that's not all. Odysseus delivers 3 speeches which are clearly connected one to the other by the progressively shortened repetition of the opening exclamation, O moi god deilos, O moi ego, and O moi. So in the Argonautica is just the same. Medea's first monologue is opened by with this kind of hidden exclamation, tipte moi deilaien, that leaves the floor to a reiterated and very obvious daily ego at the opening of our monologue as well. So I suggest that for sticking to this expression, this daily ego, which Apollonius takes care to duplicate in a poem known for its lexical fastidiousness and love of variatio, it must be something worth exploring since it is so evident at the beginning of two long speeches. So we have to trace back the roots of this self-invocation with the adjective deilos to the very fons et origo of the epic diction, the Iliad. So in this poem, it occurs exactly twice. The first time used by Thetis in an untimely death lament for the still alive Achilles in Book 18, a famous passage which arose Plato's anger also for its emotional intensity. And the other one is Hecuba in a lament for Hector, who have just been killed by Achilles. So what these two passages have in common is self-evident. They are expressions of sorrow by mothers deprived of their children, and the rarity of this expression in Homer has persuaded critics that the reiteration of these two crucial points here and only here is no chance. It serves the purposes of highlighting the universality of maternal grief, human and divine alike. And please note that this is not a proper formula, it's more of a rhetorical touch, which links different situations in sections of the poems which are far removed one from the other. As a counterexample, this is not a way other characters lament the death of their relatives. Significantly, Andromache uses another term where mourning her husband, Hector. My feeling is that this nuance did not pass unobserved and that it left a mark in the use of this expression in later Greek literature. I'd limit myself to complete texts, such as the tragic corpus and Hellenistic poetry. But in dramatic texts, you can see that in most cases the expression is used for female characters, and moreover, then they are often grieving mothers, like in the Suppliant's Women, or Jocasta in Euripides, or Medea herself, Hecuba. Of course, we have the exception of Creon, who is, however, mourning the death of his son. And I think especially these examples from the Hecuba are illuminating. Here, the last lament connects Hecuba and Polyxena in their mutual sorrow for their impending eternal separation. Here, the expression is repeated so many times that it easily becomes the translation in rhetoric terms of the spiraling grief of the unhappy mother. And please note that Euripides is careful not to use this trope for not maternal characters. For instance, in this counterexample, we have Phaedra in love, and despair is expressed by multiple self-invocations, artfully disposed also in different metrical siddhas, and nowhere is oimoi delaios or something like that to be seen. To turn to times closer to Apollonius' Hellenistic poetry has plenty of examples of this non-written maternal symbolism which permeates our expressions. So first Callimachus, in his hexametric poetry, the usage is bound to distressing situations for mothers, just like Chariclos, Tiresias' mother in the Bath of Pallas, or Erysichthon's mother in the hymn to Demeter, and even Zeus's miserable lovers in Hera's spiteful words in the hymn to Delos. And so in Aratus' Cassiopeia, Andromeda's mother, is Dele, and instances can still be found in the mourning speech of the Theotokos, the mother of God, in the Euripidean Cinto Christus Patiens, maybe taken from the Bacchae, we don't know. But the most striking occurrence is probably embedded in the Argonautica itself. The first book is opened by the arrangements for Argos' departure, to which the Iolcian women respond in anguish for the incoming sorrows for Alcimede, Jason's mother. And I would like to read this text in full, just to highlight some interesting details. So the women say poor Alcimede, sorrow for you too late yet certain has come, nor have you finished your life in happiness. Aeson too is greatly unfortunate, better surely for him had he long since, wrapped in his funeral shroud, lain underground in ignorance of this wretched context. Better too for Phrixus, when Virgin Helle perished, to have sunk in the black swell ram too, and so on. You may already start hearing some kind of echoes. For instance, this rare word aglaie, which means splendor of life, or the use of this ophelan to express a wish, an impossible wish, or even the word amorous. You have probably already heard them. You have read them in Medea's speech, and you are going to listen to them now again here in the very speech of Alcimede, Jason's mother, in the first book, just after the comments of the women of Iolcus. Let's have a look to this text. So she says, would that upon the day when I heard wretched me King Pelias utter his painful proclamation, the breath had left me at once, I'd forgotten my troubles, so that you with your own hands might have interred me, my child. That alone was what I had left to hope from you. With all other returns for nature, I'm surfeited. And she continues, she says, she calls herself Deusamoros. In my virginity, once I took such delight and pride. So let's have a picture of these two texts in comparison, Alcimedes' lament and Medea's speech together. I have highlighted the several lexical similarities in speech and the rhetoric deploys to the one already mentioned. I would like to have now this homoi emes ates, which is an expression only used here and in Medea's speech. In all extant Greek literature, it is undeniable that our Medea, who is uncertain whether to save or not Jason, is mirroring the anxieties and sorrows of Alcimede, already fully convinced that her son is going to die. So unbeknownst to herself, Medea speaks like a mother, but her hidden and impending maternity is matched by a convolute and veiled fashion to express her gut feelings. So in the end, we can reply to the question how Apollonius managed to suggest, even indirectly, the paradoxically to come literary past of his main character. This is not proper allusivity because there is no echo of a peculiar world. Delos is in itself very common, or at least it's not only that. It's like a remaking of some epic leitmotiv which are spread all over the Greek epic corpus and beyond, and which Apollonius remolds in his poem to make sure the reader is prepared to their use in the third book. And I think that the best way to explain this use of fragments of epic and tragic diction is the musical medium of the leitmotif. They are kind of debris of musical themes already heard, which emerge and coalesce unexpectedly to signal the presence of unseen paths and suggesting feelings and topics which are not explicitly uttered. We may say, nunc Medea est Medea, but in a distinctive and very unique Apollonian fashion, she is a grieving mother-to-be and unconsciously speaking with the voices of all the Greek mothers in literature before her. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm eager to have your comments.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. That was also great. And this is a wonderful occasion to discuss this fascinating text. Christiane, as you might know, I normally allow the first speaker to offer a comment, a suggestion, a reaction immediately after the second presentation. So if you want, this is your moment.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I do like the research you have done into Delos, but I am a bit skeptical about whether this really knits so closely. The Delos is a very shifting term. Of course, the passages you quoted when you put them side by side look very convincing, but the Delos is the normal, if I remember it correctly, the normal epithet for humans as opposed to gods. Deiloi anthropoi. And it would need some more thinking maybe on my part to be convinced that it is really a term which leads the reader to motherhood and mothers. On the other hand, maybe you should follow up on this. I recently heard a paper given on the second book of the Aeneid, where the colleague Claudia Claude suggested that Dido speaks in the second book of the Aeneid when she addresses, or end of the first book, when she addresses Aeneas in order to make him tell his story, that she insinuates that she wants to have a child. And at first I thought, well, rubbish. But she rather convincingly led us through the text and had a couple of very persuasive suggestions. So I'm not yet decided whether I can really lay so much weight on the Delos. And again, I would, if I could now, I will look into the Scholia, whether there are any interesting discussions, because normally you find something. So it might be it might be worthwhile looking up the passages. That also when the tragic poets use the word, it comes in handy because it scans easily in both meters, and it is a frequent word. But maybe you will still convince me.
No, thank you for this remark. I have to make a sort of a point which probably was not I didn't stress enough. So you are certainly right that the Delos term is very common, and thank you also for the comment on the relationship between gods and humans. I was interested in the way Delos is used in self-addressed invocations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because this is the context we have here, and the fact that Apollonius uses it twice at the beginning of a monologue, this sounded suspicious to me, because this is not what Apollonius normally does. He is very careful not to repeat, and also always to give new variations to his themes. So I only looked to the occurrences of this adjective in self-addressed invocations, and I was struck by the fact that it's quite gender determined, and especially also by role. So it's it's used by mothers in like Thetis and Hecuba. Of course, there are also exceptions, but the main one is Creon from the Antigone, and the other ones are like all following these patterns. These are always invocations who mothers make to describe their emotional state. So I think that it's difficult that this is only chance on Apollonius' side, who is also very
nothing is fortuitous in Apollonius. Yeah,
yes.
There I absolutely follow you with you now.
And you're absolutely right in the fact that the Scholia may have some clues to this. Unfortunately, as far as I remember, Apollonius' Scholia on this particular point are not of help because they not take these into consideration explicitly. And I also had a look to the Scholia on Homer, of course, but they are not commenting on this very point. Probably I should check more the Scholia on the tragic corpus. Maybe there can be something in Euripides, but I'm not sure that it was it was like something which sounded so clear in the mind of readers. Thank you also for the suggestion to the lecture on Dido. This is certainly something that can be useful for me. There was an article by Pattoni on this particular use of Delos in general in the Iliad and in the Odyssey. So I made use of it. She was dealing with Delos in general and with the invocation form, but it can also be used to address other people, which is not my concern, my specific concern here. But this is also a noticeable piece of scholarship which can be used for this context.
Okay, thank you. Wow, you are really on your text. So, do we have any other comment or question for our two speakers? Don't be shy. We are among friends, literally. Yeah, perhaps I can offer, for what it is, a absolutely external commentary. I just published an article on the Ovidian Medea, thus the Medea whom Cristiano was mentioning of the Metamorphosis. And of course, the first thing that becomes evident is that this Medea doesn't correspond at all. And she's very interstitial. They say it's Hissus and Engelhardt who produced a very good article, a guide to the interpretation of this very particular Medea. Obviously, Ovid was obsessed with Medea, and it is so bad that we don't have his tragedy. And but among other things, since I came to Medea really from a completely different perspective, and what I discovered is that this Medea is not the typical Medea. So I was wondering, do you think that there is something specific in this particular figure from the vantage point of reception studies, maybe of classical reception, that makes her particularly unstable, always looking for her own identity? Because it was I was also thinking at that passage by Seneca, Nunc sum Medea, right? So she's nunc,
Medea fiam, and then the two belong together.
And is there of course, Apollonius, as Alessandro was also showing clearly, is a very we cannot almost recognize her. There is always this feeling that we cannot recognize Medea. So I was wondering if you would agree that there is something particular in this figure that, in comparison to other figures, perhaps is more problematic in this sense, like searching for her own identity. I don't know, just an idea.
Yeah, I if I had more time, I would have quoted a poem by Bert Brecht, which I didn't know existed, written in 1934 on Medea, where he encapsulates the feeling of uneasiness and the growing terror in Nazi Germany, centered on the person of Medea, the stranger who's threatened because she looks differently and talks differently. And hast du den Brecht mal da, Markus? Ja.
Ich hoffe, dass es drin ist. Hast du den
Warte
Titel?
mal, ich finde das jetzt nicht. This encapsulates in a very neat way and much briefer and with less bombast what Christa Wolf then did in her Medea piece, which I find a bit, well, it's very, you get the full message all the time. That yeah, let me have a look whether I can find it. Die Medea von Lodge. Will you allow me to read it?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Da ist eine alte Mähre, von einer Frau Medea genannt. Die kam vor 1000 Jahren an einen fremden Strand. Der Mann, der sie liebte, brachte sie dorthin. Er sagte, du bist zu Hause, wo ich zu Hause bin. Sie sprach eine andere Sprache als die Leute dort. Für Milch und Brot und Liebe hatten sie ein anderes Wort. Sie hatte andere Haare und ging ein anderes Gehen. Ist nie dort heimisch geworden, wurde scheel angesehen. Wie es mit ihr gegangen, erzählt der Euripides. Seine mächtigen Chöre singen von einem vergilbten Prozess. Nur der Wind geht noch über die Trümmer der ungastlichen Stadt. Und Staub sind die Steine, mit denen sie, die Fremde, gesteinigt hat. Da hören wir mit einem Mal jetzt die Rede gehen, es würden in unseren Städten von neuem Medeen gesehen. Zwischen Tram und Auto und Hochbahn wird das alte Geschrei geschrien 1934 in unserer Stadt Berlin.
Ja,
ich kannte das Gedicht nicht, es ist unglaublich. Und also auch gerade was ich in meinem Land hier jetzt so erlebe, da passt es wirklich sehr gut.
Yeah, we should. Sorry, Christiane. We should speak in English. Sorry, because not everybody.
I didn't know the poem. I read it a few weeks ago, and it really impressed me a lot because of the now all our political circumstances, which it seems very close.
Right.
Very appropriate right now. So maybe it's the situation of the stranger, what you talked about, Marco, that she's always strange wherever and foreign, wherever she is.
Yeah, right. Any other, Alessandro, feel free to jump in if you want to add something or comment on this, and then we must close our.
I've spoken a lot. I spoke a lot. So if someone has a question, please join us. Otherwise, I can make a comment on this.
I see Marcus' posture is indicating something with this and like that. Like are you ready to go for something?
No, I'm very impressed by both talks, and yeah. I try to imagine the moment when somebody like Seneca invents this final line in this Medea story. Yeah, what happened before that? That's just as disclosing my thoughts on that point.
Okay, maybe this question should be answered on another occasion, and it is very nice to conclude the Titubante testo with a question. So thank you so much again, Christiane and Alessandro, and I hope you can also continue to have a dialogue between you, if this is possible. Let me announce next meeting is on Pygmalion, Ovid's Pygmalion, of course, on the 14th, so next Tuesday. Another English binomio by our colleague Stella Aleku from the University of Ioannina and Elena Lombardi from Oxford University. So thank you so much, and I'll see you very soon. Take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Ciao.